My name is Joost Ouendag, and we decided to do something a little different this time around. I'm just going to share with you the pictures that I took while I was in Antarctica. I had the incredible fortune of being on Viking Octantis for its first two voyages, and I brought a camera along. I had some work to do, obviously, but I thought it would be a great idea to just show you what anyone that travels with us gets to see, gets to experience, and I will talk you through it. And then after that, as usual, you can ask all kinds of questions that you may have of a now experienced Antarctic traveler. So let's dive right in. James, this is your cue for the first slide, and we will start with a little map, as we always do when we discuss a particular itinerary. What it shows here is that you fly into Ushuaia, which is at the bottom of the world, and then you travel towards, then you go across this body of water called the Drake Passage, and from there you start to explore the Antarctic Peninsula. That's where it gets really interesting. I can give you an example on the first cruise that we were down there. The first day went exactly as planned. The second day, however, already, we ended up with not plan B, but plan C. And this is entirely normal. This is par for the course in Antarctica. So, and that's also, I think, where it gets really interesting, because you even though you don't necessarily get what you think you're going to get the day prior, when there is a discussion about, oh, tomorrow we're going to do this and maybe we're going to do that, there's always a little bit of a caveat. The interesting thing is, yes, you never quite know what you're going to get. But remember, when Forrest Gump said that, he was talking about a box of chocolates. So you already know that whatever it is that you're going to get, it's going to be something good. It may not be what you expect, but it's going to be something good. And that's exactly how Antarctica works. Next slide, please. So this is the Antarctic Explorer, as you can book it with us. It's 13 days. You're in one country, and that's Argentina, and two continents. And we fly you into Buenos Aires, then we continue on to Ushuaia. That was a little different this year because of COVID. We had to bring a lot of people directly into Ushuaia. Then you spend about a day and a half, really, crossing the Drake Passage. From Ushuaia, you depart through the Beagle Channel, which is very sheltered and which is very tranquil waters, and then you go into the Drake Passage. Then you spend day 4 through 10 on the Antarctic Peninsula. You cross back into the Drake Passage, you sail up the Beagle Channel, and you go back to Ushuaia. And then the next slide shows you what my itinerary was for this particular, for the time that I spent there. I spent a grand total of 23 days between Buenos Aires and flying home, and my home is Switzerland, is Basel, Switzerland. And I started off with a few days in Buenos Aires to get acclimatized, and then I flew down to Ushuaia. We crossed the Drake Passage for me on day 4 of my journey. We spent a somewhat shortened time in Antarctica for the first voyage that I was down there. We came back through the Drake Passage. And through the Beagle Channel, disembarked the first journey in Ushuaia. I stayed on for an extra one, so I went right back through the Drake Passage, spent another week or so on the Antarctic Peninsula, and then came back, and that was the 4th time I did the Drake Passage. That's it in a nutshell. And from here on, with the exception of one rare image, I'm going to show you the photographs that I took. And it's just going to be like that neighbor you may remember from when you were little, that went to exotic places and came to your house to show you all his pictures. So we'll flip through my album, if you will. This is the Beagle Channel, and so you do have this sense that you're a little at the end of the world. This part of South America, because of where it sits at the very tip, with water all around it, tends to get an awful lot of rain. But every once in a while, the sun peeks through and it looks absolutely glorious. And you do have this sense that you're at the end of the world. And that's what, in my mind, that's what this photograph kind of shows you, that you're in a place unlike any other place. And then you get into, oh, yes, that was a little surprise. We were thinking that we were going to go to the end of the world and beyond. And here was all of a sudden Viking Jupiter that was on its way around the tip of South America up to Buenos Aires. So we had a chance to say hello to the sister ship before we moved on. And then we plunged headlong into the Drake Passage. And the reason I show you these three birds, the top two are Pintado petrels, and the one on the bottom is a southern fulmar. And the reason I wanted to start with these, and you see a little bit of choppy waves in the background, is that the Drake Passage is certainly not something that you just have to get through on your way to Antarctica. It's an ecosystem all in its own. There's an enormous variety of birds. There is usually also other wildlife that you can observe. And what I found on our ship, and we have a very experienced expedition crew a lot of these people have done the Drake Passage dozens of times in their lives. Everyone says to do it with this ship is unlike anything they've experienced. So the Drake Passage, as I experienced it 4 times, the first time was a little rocky, the second time was quiet, the third time was quiet, the fourth time again was a little rocky, but it was nothing as you imagine it would be. You know, maybe you've read about it and you've been warned. It really is an experience. Yes, it can be a little choppy, but it's really an experience all by itself, to have these endless seas and then to have these birds and to have possible other wildlife. I'll show you at the very end some other critters that I encountered. It's quite an experience. And then the next slide does show you, yes, it does on occasion get a little choppy. And then as waters start to calm down, all of a sudden, and in my case, sailing into Fournier Bay on Enver's Island on the Antarctic Peninsula was still a little shrouded in fog. And then you see a first iceberg, and then you kind of know we've arrived. And miraculously on this day in Fournier Bay, it didn't take very long and the heavens opened. And you will see a little video, and that starts with Fournier Bay, and then it shows a few other snippets that I took along the way. But it's a really nice little introduction. So that first little snippet in that video is what I saw and what everyone else saw. And you cannot imagine how happy and how giddy everyone was as people were then milling around and about on the bow, which is a perfect space on the ship to just admire the scenery. It's one of the best hangouts that we have. James, go ahead with that little video. Okay, so that was a little taste of what we did with a video camera. I wanted to have you. I wanted to show you this shot. So we have arrived at Fournier Bay here, and this is a picture I took of my own camera and my Antarctic wildlife guide, which I can highly recommend, by the way. And this is the Nordic balcony, and you know, when you read about this in the brochure, it sounds like it's a really interesting feature that we have. You lower the window, and you have this ledge that kind of works as a lookout. And then the reason I put this picture in here is because I could not believe how phenomenal this spot really is. You could easily just spend hours hanging out there. And the beautiful thing is you close the window, and even in Antarctica, the temperature in your room is going to be up to normal again in no time at all. So it is really a perfect spot if you just want to watch the scenery go by. And keep in mind, you're here in summer. The sun rises right after it's set. You have about 3 hours in peak summer. You have about 2 to 3 hours of dusk, I would say, before the sun rises again. So that hangout, in my case, in particular, it got an awful lot of use. Okay, and then we go into I think the next slide, James, is where this is where everyone's happy and everyone's a little cold, but everyone's super excited, you know, because now we've reached Antarctica. And we're in this phenomenal place with little icebergs all around, and on the mountains you have all these snow. On the mountains you have this thick layer of snow, and everyone has this sense that they have finally arrived. So next slide. Yeah, and then, you know, the phenomenal thing, and what I could not get enough of, are all the icebergs. This one in the foreground, the shapes are incredible. The colors are incredible. Some of them are almost translucent. You'll see quite a few icebergs in this presentation. Like I said, you know, I'm like that neighbor, and you can't really say no when he comes with his picture albums. And so there we go. Next slide, James. Yes, of course. Fournier Bay is also the first time that you start to see these guys. Mostly what you will find on the Antarctic Peninsula are humpback whales. And this one, this one was shot from the ship. You'll see some later on that were done from a special operations boat, and perhaps even from a Zodiac, where you get yet a little closer. So next slide, please. Yeah, this is one of those icebergs that has this otherworldly color. And of course, it has a lot to do with where the sun is at a particular point in time. Here, what you can see is there must be a cloud right above that iceberg, and that's why you get this really dark blue. No, none of these images have been retouched and colored in or anything like that. This is just what you see. And this is also what makes in my mind, what makes the icebergs just so incredible. Next slide. Okay, so that's Fournier Bay. And the reason I put this slide in here is because if you look very closely, go to your right, you will see Viking Octantis. You can see the ship. It's all the way to the right. And this was, I threw this in just so that you have a sense of the scale of the landscape that you look at. That probably is the hardest part to catch, you know, just how immense it all is. And the ship does, you know, having the ship as small as it looks there does it a little bit of justice. But this is one of those things, to get a sense of scale, you have to have been there. Sorry. Next slide. That's from an SOB, so from a special operations boat, and that is the back of a humpback. Just before, in this case, you know, you kind of, this is the sport that you get into when you watch humpback whales. The question is he going for a deep dive, or is it a shallow dive? If it's a shallow dive, you really just see the back and these dorsal bumps. If the whale goes for a deeper dive, then the tail, the fluke, comes out, and that's what you're kind of hoping for. This was one where the fluke did not come out, so this was kind of a lazy, you know, just a little bit below the surface, and then, you know, this repeats itself until the whale then decides to go deep, and then you get the fluke. But this was pretty spectacular because it was so close. It was I think the whale may have gone under the boat at this stage. Okay, next slide. Another iceberg. We'll move on. Next slide. This is the next morning. This is in Paradise Bay, and this is very early in the morning. And again, this was a very foggy day, and you know, the weather is not always like you see it in nature documentaries. There is quite a bit of fog. There are low-hanging clouds. It doesn't really matter, and that's what you will see over and over again. I think some of the most spectacular views we had were of days that were overcast. And this is very early in the morning, and that's how you get this cobalt blue iceberg. Next slide. That is Brown Base. That is an Argentinian station. And if you look very carefully, you can see all these little dots on the hill behind it. That is a little walk up to a viewpoint from where you have a view of the entire bay. The bay itself is called Paradise Bay. And again, the station is Brown Point. It's an Argentinian research base. There was no one home while we were there. There were just Gentoo penguins. And they're everywhere, and they're loud and noisy, and they're just incredible, great fun. I think there are two things that make us love penguins so much. One, because they walk upright. You know, we as animals that also walk upright kind of look at the penguins and go, yeah, that's what we do. The other part is they are very, they're like humans in a way, in that they're close together. They all stand there. They all argue with each other. They all have lots of things to say, and they kind of look comfortable with each other. They accept each other. They're huddled close together. I think those are, you know, it's easy to humanize a penguin, if you will. These guys have just made it onto this rock, and that's a feat for penguins. They jump a lot, and you'll see some other shots of penguins that are just getting ready to jump. You can study that to just see how precarious they sometimes move from rock to rock, and they're quite dexterous after a while. But sometimes you wonder if they don't just how they do not just slip and slide back into the water. Next slide. Yes, so I love this one because it's really hard to see what's actually going on, and we sat there for a good 30-40 seconds as we're staring what was happening in the water. And of course, that is a crab-eater seal. You can just see the nostrils, but the animal itself is really, really well camouflaged. It has the color of the water that it's in. Next slide. That is a snowy sheathbill. And if there's a bird in Antarctica where the adjective scrappy fits, it's this bird. It's the only land bird, and you can see it's not a seabird. It's not like a penguin. It has normal little bird feet. It doesn't have webbed feet. It's the only land bird that nests on Antarctica. So it's an incredibly hardy bird, and it's picking across, in these rocks to find food. It spends all its life finding food. It eats pretty much everything. And it's not a particularly pretty bird. You can't really see its face very well here, but it has kind of this pinkish face, and it looks a little warty, but it is an incredible survivor. And that's why a lot of people, ornithologists love this bird because it's so well adapted, and it's such a miracle of adaptation. Next slide. That is one of my favorites too. This is a chinstrap penguin. And where we were, this is, I think this is Demoy Point, and not sure it was Demoy Point. Anyhow, this is where you have an awful lot of Gentoo penguins. Those are the black and white ones. You see a Gentoo penguin here in the back with a red beak. And this chinstrap looked a little lost because there was one chinstrap penguin in a very large colony of Gentoos. And he did not feel that he stood out at all. He tried to make conversation, and he was very nice to the other penguins, but it was clear that he stood out a little bit. And they're called chinstrap, of course, as you can see, because they have this chinstrap in their feathers. Next slide. This is a good one because it shows that penguins, when they do, and it happens, they fall, they run over the snow, or they waddle over the snow, and every once in a while they fall over. And if they fall forward, that doesn't seem to faze them at all. They just propel themselves this way, and they slide on their bellies, and they can make quite a speed there too. So next slide. And this is a good picture because this shows what a penguin highway looks like. And you think that this is just a name, and that it's kind of, a funny little name for an insider joke. But you can see in the snow, whenever you are close to a penguin colony, you have these trails that are relatively deep. Most times the trail is about as deep as half a penguin. So when you look at the penguin highway from the side, all that you see are these bobbing heads. And this is how penguins move around in their colonies, and this is how they also move to the water, where they get food. So one of the rules that you have to abide by when you're in Antarctica and when you land, you're a guest. The penguins live there, you get to go home. So you're a guest. And one of the rules is do not step into the penguin highway when penguins are crossing. Penguins always have the right of way. And that's because they get very confused when you're in their way. They have no real good recourse, and they just turn around and go back where they came from. And that's not good, because the penguins need to go to the water to find food. So the moment you stand in a penguin highway for too long, this is why we make sure, and our people on shore make sure that you don't. But if you were to do so, then, there's no lunch for these 4 penguins. Next slide. This is a good one because this shows you, and I know this is yet another iceberg, but this was a chunk of ice that is completely translucent. And this, actually, we broke off a piece of this because this comes from glacial ice. This is thousands of years old. And it is so condensed. There are tiny little air bubbles in it. You can chop off a little bit of this, you can chip it off, throw it in a glass with a little drink, and as the ice starts to melt, you can hear little pops and fizzes, because these air bubbles that have been trapped in the ice for hundreds and thousands of years are released. Thing of beauty. Next slide. Okay, and now this is when we move into another area. This is Wilhelmina Bay. And again, what fascinated me here is that we had these low-hanging clouds. This is a very sheltered bay, so the water surface is absolutely, it's like a mirror, and you are in this other world. And because of the fog, you don't hear a lot of noise. The ship moves very, very slowly. The ship is very quiet, so it really becomes this. The first time you see this, it's absolutely surreal with all these icebergs, and the colors are actually a little bit better on the icebergs, I find, especially these blues, when it's a little overcast. It deepens things a little bit. When you have the sun glaring on it, it usually just the whiteness of the iceberg reflects a lot of sunlight, and it drowns out all these little details that you can see really well on this iceberg, all these grooves. Next slide. Yeah, that was another crab eater seal that went right by our ship. You can see that it was snowing a little bit at this stage, and the crab eater seal doesn't really mind. And there were other friendly animals in the water. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, this is another one of those mirror images. And again, the colors really pop. The blue in particular pops when it's all kind of gray and white, and then all of a sudden you have these icebergs. And the next slide, I think, shows you another critter. That is a minke whale, and they are a lot more colorful. They're not very large. If you watch too many disaster movies, you may think that that's like a gargantuan shark, but it's not. It's a very friendly animal. And this one just decided, it was very, very curious. It stayed with the ship for a good half hour or so, and we could really take our time and have a good look at what the whale was up to. So it's a very small little whale. Doesn't fit in a purse, but it's a lot smaller than what you think of when it comes to whales. And this is the parting shot from Wilhelmina Bay. We can move on. And now we're already on our way back, because this is President Head. This is in the South Shetland Islands. If you look at a map, that is an archipelago that is kind of to the north of the peninsula. And this is a Weddell seal. You can recognize it because it has all these little spots. And that one was just having a grand old time hanging out on the snow. President Head is an island known for its elephant seals. And the next slide are going to show you what those look like. Yes, these are almost all males. Where we were, this haul out had mostly males, not a lot of females, a lot of young males. You didn't see what's called a beach master, and those are just enormous males that have a harem of several females that are the boss and that get to mate with the females. These are younger animals that are testing each other out, and they spend days doing that. These guys are probably going to be bumping into each other, butting heads, nipping at each other for a good 15 minutes, and then they take a 2-hour break, and then they go at it again, and then they take a 2-hour break. And it's fun to watch it endlessly. The next one looks like a ferocious animal. He's actually yawning here. So this is not a ferocious animal at all. It's kind of a lazy animal. Okay, next slide. Yes, so this is on the way. This is now, okay, so this is on my second trip. So up the Drake Passage, turn around in Ushuaia, down the Drake Passage again. And now we're back in Fournier Bay. Now remember, the first time I was in Fournier Bay, we had these blue skies. You saw this panoramic shot of these mountains with snow on with these thick layers of snow and all these icebergs. And this is the atmosphere that I saw when we were there the second time. It was overcast. It was solid gray, but you had these otherworldly icebergs, and you still have, because it's a relatively sheltered bay, you still have a lot of wildlife that you get to experience from the ship. We do in a place like Fournier Bay, we would also use the special operations boat in particular, but you can see an awful lot from the ship. And here, I just took a picture first of that iceberg. You can see some spots on it, and then I zoomed in a little bit to see exactly what was going on. And that's the next slide. Penguins, they're basically hitchhiking on an iceberg. And there are 2 chin straps here and a handful of gentoos. And they're all, I think, these guys are all laughing at the one that just fell down all the way to the right of the image. That's what it looks like. Again, it's easy to imagine penguins as if they're people. And then the next slide is a forlorn, and I believe that's a crab-eater seal. It's hard to see from a distance, but it doesn't have the mottled coat that a Weddell seal has. So I venture a guess that this is a crab-eater. And then, of course, what you have in Fournier Bay are the humpback whales. And this was a good one. He was very obliging, show us his entire tail. And this is just seconds before he flips, shows the bottom of his tail. That's the fluke, and that's what you take a picture of, because that's how you can identify the actual, each of these. It's like a fingerprint on a humpback whale. And one of the things that we do on board is we encourage people to take pictures of the fluke, upload them in an app, and the app has a silly name. It's called Happy Whale, but it's actually a scientific database that tracks humpback whales all over the world. And it's quite amazing how far that goes. There are whales that show up in Baja California that have been to Antarctica. They really they cover enormous distances. And for the longest time, it was thought that humpback whales were all kind of located in the same area. They actually travel enormous distances. Next slide. That is a slide that is courtesy of Tad and Donna Dellinger that I met on the second cruise I was on, and that shows the Octantis, and this is near Demoy Point. I just thought that this was a phenomenal shot of the ship. You know, you do see it from a lot of perspectives when you're on land, and I just thought that I should include this one. They sent it to me. I sent them some pictures of us all together kayaking, and they sent me this in return, so I thought it was good to include. Next slide. Okay, I put this in there because this is Demoy Point, and this is one of those days that started with very overcast, and then eventually the fog lifted, and you see these glorious mountains, and in the foreground you can see these penguins. These are Gentoo penguins, and I just thought it was a perfect little image to show the scale and the majesty of the landscape that surrounds you, and then these penguins, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination to just imagine how harsh life must be in such a grandiose and such a grand landscape when the going gets tough. This was a great day, but the penguins don't get that many breaks, so they're very hardy animals. Next slide. This is a giant petrel, a giant southern petrel that is just about to take off. And it looks a little bit like a dirty gull, but it's a lot larger. It's a good 2.5 to 3 times the size of a gull. It's really kind of the size of a fairly large hawk. And this one did not appreciate being photographed because it lifted off. And as I'm trying to follow it with my camera, as it does so, someone yelled at me and I ducked. And as I looked up, as I kind of lowered my head, I looked up and the animal was kind of shooting over my head. So, you know, you do have close encounters. This was a phenomenal one. Next slide. Okay, and this is also a good one. These are the same mountains I showed you earlier, but now look very closely. You can see our kayaks in the water there. And the kayaks, you know, you're not even a foot above the water line here, and that changes your perspective. You know, and it sounds a little strange, but you feel small. You feel small in this enormous landscape, and because you can pedal rather than paddle, right? You can develop a little bit of speed, and it's such an amazing thing to experience. It's such a good perspective to have. And here you see some zodiacs. This was such a cool day because again, you start off with you know, kind of the steel blue sky, steel gray sky, placid waters, you know, mirrors really. And we started off with the zodiac ride on this day, and we saw some seals lounging on. There we go. So that is a crab eater again. Now this is not blood on their on his mouth. That's just krill. Krill is red, and so he just doesn't have a napkin and he can't clean his mouth off. But it's not that he's been eating something very bloody. He's just been feeding on krill. And so this is and there's the Weddell seal. With its, you know, and again, it's easy to see because a Weddell seal has all these, you know, has a very mottled coat. And this is with a decent telephoto lens, but you're not more than about 7-8 yards away from the animal. And this is because they float on an iceberg. And Hidden Bay is such a perfect example of how you can have this most spectacular of days and not necessarily have a landing. You don't really, you know, a landing is great, and especially seeing the penguins is beautiful. And then, you know, there's a lot of people like the idea of setting foot on the Antarctic continent. Without ever setting foot on any land, Hidden Bay, for most of the guests that we had on this particular journey, it was probably the best day that they had because there's more. There's more. You saw that calving glacier maybe when James showed you the little bit of video. That was part of it. You know, we watched a glacial front, a tidewater glacier come down slice by slice. It kept falling off, and people kept being able to see what this was like. And it makes a lot of noise. It makes more noise than what it presents visually, really. And but it's still quite spectacular. This is also in Hidden Bay, and you can never get enough. I could never get enough of these colors and these shapes. It's just so incredible. You cannot imagine this is just nature, that this is not someone that sits there and kind of colors this, this white surface, but there it is. So this was the morning in Hidden Bay. And this again is the Octantis. This is from, this was shot probably from either a kayak or a Zodiac. But then the weather started to change, and that's going to be next. There you go. That's still Hidden Bay, and that's how we spend the afternoon. Glorious sunlight, these most amazing sharp peaks, just you're in the exact same place, completely different day. Really, two for the price of one. And then on this particular journey, I'll show you something, but you cannot tell anyone, because this is very, very unusual. In the evening, the ship passed by a small iceberg, and we saw a penguin, a very, very unusual penguin. This is a young emperor penguin. And emperor penguins normally live on Antarctic ice shelves. They're much further to the south, and this one was clearly lost. This was far away from where it would normally be. Actually on the wrong side of the Antarctic peninsula. And what you can see when you look at its chest, it's all fluffy under its chin. The penguin is molting. And as long as the penguin is molting, that happens all at once. All his old feathers come off and he grows new feathers. The penguin cannot swim. The coat of feathers protects penguins from freezing to death in the water. They're very, very important. And when a penguin is shedding its old coat, getting a new coat, it can't swim for a while. Again, it's just such an amazing adaptation, because the penguin just stands there for days on end until he's ready to go back into the water. And remember, the water is where the food is. So these animals go without food for long stretches of time. This is why sometimes you see penguins towards the end of summer, they're just fat. And that's because they need to be prepared for winter. So this is highly unusual. Please do not come on a voyage to Antarctica and imagine that this is what you're going to see, because you will. And this is the beauty. This is why I left it in here. The beauty of every journey that we've had is everyone that came back has reported something very, very unique, very unusual. And I think that is really one of the most wonderful things of this entire experience. You don't know what you're going to get, but it is amazing and it is awesome. We had a group just after I was there that had a leopard seal that took offense to a zodiac that came too close to where the leopard seal was, and the leopard seal just bit in the zodiac. So you get a very close encounter. Not dangerous. These zodiacs have a lot of redundancy built in. We had to put vulcanized rubber on the spots where the leopard seal had bit the zodiac, but it was fine. It was quite exciting for the guests that were on that zodiac. Next slide. Okay, and that's the evening. I mentioned this early on, so this is probably at 11 o'clock at night or so, and it's just, stay up, sleep after your voyage with us. Do that all after. Make long days, because the landscape keeps changing. You keep seeing things from that beautiful Nordic balcony. And the next slide shows you what I saw later on. This was a much friendlier, and this is where the sun is really low. This is a giant southern giant petrel, big bird skimming the surface of the water. And this is probably at midnight. Next slide. Yeah, different part. This is at no, this is Cuverville Island. This is an area that has some of the largest Gentoo colonies in the world. Thousands of penguins here, very noisy. It also gets a little stinky, but it's something you get used to. And I love this particular shot because after a while observing the penguins, you know exactly what he's doing. He's looking because he needs to take a next step. And they're very deliberate because with those flippers, they can't, you know, if they slip, they just fall and it hurts unless they're really, really fat. And this one seems to have a good layer of fat already. But, you know, they look very carefully. They extend their necks to look at what their next step is going to be. This one just came ashore. You can see, you know, if you look very closely, you can see little water drips that are falling off his coat. So he just landed and he was getting onto the beach. Next. This is a gull, and I believe that this is a kelp gull. You see a lot of different birds. It's not just penguins. Ornithologists will tell you it's not a particularly rich bird life that you have in Antarctica. There's just, you know, there's a few dozen species. But especially if you're an amateur like I am, it's relatively easy to tell them apart. And it's great fun because you can get relatively close. These birds are not all that afraid of you. So the next slide also shows you a bird. And that is, and it's a little hard to see, but if you look very closely, just next to that little yellow, that orange, and that belongs there. That's not some scar. This bird has that orange thing right above its beak, and you can kind of see the eye. It's a blue-eyed shag, and it's named blue-eyed shag because it has this really quite vibrant blue eye. Next slide. So this gives you a better overview. This is Cuverville, and this shows you what a penguin colony looks like. Now, all that red, the rocks there have all kinds of different colors, but the red is mainly food, regurgitated food, and poop. And all of this is krill in various different forms, and that creates this relatively pinkish color in many places. And if you look very closely, in the foreground in particular, you can see these white streaks, and it's a little strange, but you know, you get very comfortable talking about penguin poop when you're in these colonies. What's really interesting is that the animals are quite clean when it comes to their nests. They will not poop in their nest. What they do is they turn their backs and then they shoot out their poop. And that, if you were to look on a penguin nest from above, it looks like a sun with rays. So they're when it comes to their nest, they're very clean. When it comes to what's just outside of their nest, they don't care so much. Next slide. That is not a Gentoo penguin eating its young. It's a Gentoo penguin that is feeding regurgitated krill to its little one there. Next slide. And there are some more little ones, fluffy little gray guys. This is also interesting. The opportunity I had to go back once. When I was the first time I was there were eggs, but there weren't a lot of young. And lo and behold, you come back. This was probably about altogether 8 or 9 days later, and there they are, the little ones fresh out of the egg. Next slide. Oh, this is so incredibly, this is beautiful. Penguins are master swimmers, and not just master swimmers, they're masters in porpoising. It's called porpoising. What they do is they skim the surface and they kind of bounce. And this gives you a really good impression of what that is like. You'll see this quite a bit, and you saw that maybe in that video earlier where we had a little bit of technical difficulties. There was some porpoising there. This, in my mind, was one of the most interesting and most fun penguin behaviors to watch. That is something that you can really, in my mind, you can watch that for quite a while as they skim the surface and keep popping up. Next slide. These are skuas. These are two skuas. They're in the middle of a penguin colony, and that makes the penguins very nervous. Skuas are predators. They're brown skuas, and they're kind of mean. They go for the little ones. They go for the eggs, and they're of course not really mean. They just do what nature intends them to do. But when you feel close to the penguins and you see the skuas, you do, and you should not. This is not something that humans can do when they interact with nature here. You are quiet and you're a guest, but you kind of feel like going, shoo skua, because you know what's going to happen next. You actually do see around penguin colonies eggs that skuas have gotten to, that they empty out and eat. Next slide. Yes, this is one I love because it shows that Antarctica is not the white continent. You can call it that, and that's okay. But when you get there, you will find that there's a lot more than just white. Now, you've seen all the icebergs, but here on Cuverville Island, you can also see this rock wall that is covered in mosses and lichens. And it just makes for spectacular rock colors, really spectacular rock colors. It also is fun to show you that the penguins, you don't think of them when you see them getting out of the water as particularly good on land, but they do climb quite a bit. This is this ledge is at least 10 yards up from the water line. So these penguins are fearless when it comes to finding a good nesting spot. Next slide. This is still the same Cuverville Island. You have a bay here, and the water currents are such that it pushes a lot of ice, little chunks, little icebergs into that bay, and this is what you can call an iceberg graveyard. This is gorgeous because when you travel around it, these icebergs topple sometimes, bits and pieces break off. That changes their center of gravity, and all of a sudden they'll go. They'll fall over, and these are not all that large, and they're great fun. Your zodiac drivers will take you around. They will zigzag through them a little bit, and it's just gorgeous because the shapes are just I forgot to put one in. I saw one. I saw an iceberg that looked exactly like an alligator, really exactly like an alligator. Next slide. Just another iceberg. Let's move on. Okay, so this is Enterprise Island. And this again was a day where we didn't touch land. We just navigated our way through a bay, and we found this guy, sleeping the day away. This is a fur seal, which is very, very comfortable on a rock there. Next slide. This I put in again, because I was on this roll of, there are so many different colors. This is not some nastiness. This is not bird poop. These are lichen or algae that grow in the snow, and they give, and green is just one of many colors. You also find a lot of red. Algae color the snow in various different colors, and so you will see a lot more than just white and gray. You see quite a variety of colors. Enterprise Island, we're getting close to the end, by the way, not quite. This slide I like to call 5 scientists in a boat, because this is our science team. The gentleman all the way to the right is Dr. Damon Stanwell Smith. Then the lady with the gray hat is Dr. Anne Flink. And then it's Dr. Daniel Moore on the left, and the two that are in civilian clothing are 2 scientists with oceanitis. They're penguin counters, and part of what we do on the ship is we invite scientists. We have our own resident scientists, and they come up with things that are useful. They don't just come up with things that are fun. They come up with things that are useful, and we firmly believe that if it's useful, we can make it interesting. And that's better than doing show and tell. And we're not doing what you used to do in biology class where you get to dissect a frog. We want it to be serious. We want it to be real, and we want it to contribute to a better understanding of the regions that we travel through. And this is true, by the way, for Antarctica, but it's also for the Great Lakes and for the Caribbean. The ship right now is moving along the coast of Brazil as we speak, and the science is ongoing on the ship. What they're doing here is they're placing underwater cameras, and we got some great footage from those underwater cameras to just simply for an hour record what is in a particular spot. And then you mark the spots very, very carefully. You lower the camera for an hour, and then you have scientists, and this is a project that we do working with the University of Western Australia, because the science effort is worldwide. People all over the world are interested in the polar regions, and we invite them on the ship. And in this case, the PhD students in Western Australia will pour through all this information that we provide, hours and hours and hours of video, to kind of learn more about what's underwater here in this particular spot. Next slide. This is an Arctic tern or an Antarctic tern. Bird goes from the very, very far north to the very far south. This bird, feisty bird, if you get too close to it, it will dive bomb your head, especially if it's nesting. So these are, and they're not very big. They're about the size of a pigeon, but they are the most incredible migratory birds really in the world. They have the longest migration of any bird. Next slide. That is my lone chin strap that we saw, that it was just sitting there on an iceberg and looking at us. Very, very curious. Next slide. This was the final whale, I think, on this journey to say goodbye. This is a humpback whale, and this was not far from Enterprise Island. We were headed towards President Head. And now you can move forward to President Head, James. Yeah, so this is that island. I showed you this earlier. This is just a nice shot because of the reflection in the water of these rocks. It gives you an idea of what the place looks like. And then, of course, there was more spectacle from the elephant seals. The next one is why I put these in. I just thought it was so funny. I spent a lot of time looking at this little guy who's a pup, and he was giving it to these, and I thought, why do you think this is a good idea to tee off an animal that is about 4 times your size? But he held his own. Nothing bad happened to this pup. Next slide. Yeah, so here again, in relation to the other animals, this pup was punching way above its weight. Next slide. See, they get tired after a while. This is so funny because they will hang like this for a while, just, waiting for the next round. They're tired and they just sit there for a while, and then they start all over again. It's fun to watch them for a little longer. Back in the Drake Passage, this was the 4th time, and this one was a little choppy. But again, not a time to sit in your stateroom and pull the covers over your head. Just go outside. It's easier that way, even if it is a little choppy. Hang on really well and see what's outside. And you'll see that there are things outside. Dusky dolphins. And, the amazing thing is that you will imagine that this is something that, I can't see them. I tried to take a picture. But I couldn't because they were there for just seconds. These dusky dolphins, there were about 6 of them. They enjoy going along with the ship. They were with us for a good 20 minutes. So you have all the time in the world to really observe what they're doing. And these are incredibly joyful animals. They are having, I don't know how else to explain it. When you see them flip and do these things in the water, it's like they're having the time of their lives. And then, the next, those are the birds of the Drake Passage. This is an albatross. This is a black-browed albatross. It's not as large. The wandering albatross is the largest of the albatrosses, but this is still a very large bird. And the beauty of these is that they just soar. This is again, I believe that this is another southern fulmar, but I'm not entirely sure. This could also be a gull, a particular gull that you see in the Beagle Channel. We've now moved to the Beagle Channel, I believe. There is another black-browed albatross, and I think that is probably the last slide, James. Yeah, that was it. Those were my 23 days at the bottom of the world. Thank you very much for indulging me and for allowing me to kind of go on a journey back there. And now we're ready for your questions.
Thank you, Joost. Yes, plenty of questions for you this evening. Our first question comes from Margaret, who is in Berkeley in the United States. Her question is this trip suitable for someone who walks with a cane?
Yes, but it depends on what it is that you expect. So one of my biggest takeaways is of this trip, you can have a phenomenal time without ever leaving the ship. Walking with a cane probably means that you will not be able to board a Zodiac. You need to be relatively fit. But the SOBs, the special operations boats, are perfect. They're a little bit of a climb to get into, but as long as you're still somewhat ambulant, you can absolutely do that. And that's what they're for. And those, that was an idea of our, our head of expedition, Johan Henriksen. He said, we have to have these boats. They're going to be, a secret weapon. And they really work out that way. The SOBs are fairly sturdy. So even if the water is a little too choppy for, let's say, kayaks, and even a little too choppy for Zodiacs, the special operations boats can still be in the water, and they're really perfect for people that have, some certain mobility impairments. So yes, I think it's suitable, but you do need to recognize that you will probably not be able to land. I've had some of the best wildlife viewing, some of the best just stunning scenery from the ship, really.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Cherry, who is in the United States. And she asks, do we have any cabins that are suitable for 3 passengers on board this ship?
We do not. No.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's an easy answer, but that's what it is. We do not.
And our next question for you comes from Sam, who is in Vancouver in Canada. They say, hi, Joost, what kind of species can we see in December? Also, how is the weather in December in general?
The weather changes, and I think you saw this. The December is you're very close to the middle of summer. So it's as good as it gets, but it is still very variable. We had snow on some days, it was cold on some days, and other days it was, almost balmy. It's like, a few degrees above freezing. So you prepare for this. You prepare for any kind of weather, and that is absolutely crucial. It really is. The second go around, I helped out a little bit on land. And on President Head, I spent 4 hours on land. You need to be warm. You need to wear clothing that keeps you warm because it does get cold. But I think we have sound advice on the website. We have good clothing that we give you to wear. So the species are similar to what you encounter when I was there. You will see humpbacks. You will have a reasonable chance of seeing minke whales. Some animals that I could not catch. We saw some orcas, some killer whales. You will see lots and lots of birds. You will see the same penguins I saw. In December, obviously, you will not see any young animals. The penguins are still all breeding. So usually, depending a little bit on where we can go with the ship, you'll see chinstrap, Adelie penguins, and gentoo penguins. And then you'll see all these other birds that I showed you, pretty much. And the seals. The one that I did not see is a leopard seal, but many of our subsequent voyages saw leopard seals. You see elephant seals, fur seals, Weddell seals, crab eater seals. Lots of animals.
Thank you, Joost. Then our next question for you comes from Denise, who is in the United States. She asks, when will more 2023 dates become available to book? And are there included excursions as well as optional excursions offered on this cruise?
The 2023 dates, that should not, more 2023 dates. I would imagine that both ships will be in Antarctica in 2023, in the first quarter of 2023. I would imagine that we probably haven't opened for sale yet the Q4 of 2023. It's possible that not all the dates are open yet, simply because we try to focus on every season to itself. Call, even if it's not online, if you have something specific in mind, you just call the call center or you go to your travel agent and you ask them, and they will be able to tell you what's in the plan and what's bookable, even if it might not necessarily show up online yet.
Thank you, Joost. And we've got a few questions about the weather, so I'm going to combine a few of them together for you. We've got Carol, who's from Fort Wayne in the United States, asking how cold does it get? And then we've also got another person called Carol from the US is asking, what's the average temperature you experienced on this trip?
I would say that the weather is extremely variable. To start off with that, and then it hovers. I would say the range is somewhere between, it'll go as low as maybe 7 degrees below freezing and 5 degrees above freezing, and that in and by itself is one thing. The other thing is, in some areas you may have air that's just moist air that's just standing there that will make it very cold. But overall, I mean, that's what you dress for. It really is what you dress for. And we're a Norwegian company, and it was Roald Amundsen who discovered the South Pole, who was the first man there. He said there's no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad clothing.
There we are. Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Kathy, who is in Minneapolis in the US. And her question is, in your opinion, Joost, is November a good time to take this trip?
Any time is a good time to take this trip. You kind of have to read up on it a little bit. So I'm going to make a plug. And no, I haven't met him in person. I'm looking forward to meeting him in person. And I'm not getting a percentage. James Lowen has written that book that you saw in the picture I had, that the Antarctic Wildlife Guide, and we have it as a tip on our website too. He has written a perfect book for wildlife, and it tells you in every season what you can expect. It's really, I've in my lifetime I've bought a lot of. We have an interview. We had an interview with James Lowen on Viking.TV. Go and look at it. Damon Stanwell Smith did that with him, and watch it and get that. Honestly, he's going to be so happy. Now get the book, because it's of all the wildlife guides I've ever bought, I think this is really the best, because it lays out your journey. It tells you what to expect in the Beagle Channel and when, what to expect in the Drake Passage and when, and what to expect on the peninsula and when. So take that book. You will not see any young animals when you travel in November, but there's a lot of things to see. So I don't believe the moment you go there, every day is different. You know, the 2 times that I spent in similar locations, it's a completely different experience. So, you know, you cannot, in my mind, you cannot have a bad experience. You cannot have a bad day. It was really, you know, and I travel professionally, and I have for the last 30 years. It's incredibly hard to say, okay, well, that day in Antarctica, that was a real dud. And anywhere else in the world, you're like, well, it may not have been a real dud, but that wasn't such a great day. You have that sometimes when you travel. You don't have that in Antarctica. You really don't. That was a lengthy answer, but there it is.
Thank you, Joost. And we've got a comment here from a passenger who actually sailed with you, Patty, who is from the United States. She says, my husband and I were with you, Joost, on the first Octantis voyage to Antarctica. And she says, it's been wonderful to revisit the voyage through your pictures. But our next question for you comes from Nancy, who is in the US. And she asks, what were you most grateful for as a result of this trip?
Gosh, that's a really big question. I think what you come back with is this. It's a very, you know, you travel in other places of the world, and a lot of it is interaction with locals, and that kind of takes center stage. And in Antarctica, you come back with this sense that you were a guest in a place where you don't belong, because the climate, you know, if you stay there too long, the climate will kill you. You know, you're really only supposed to be there for a short period of time. And it instills, it goes very autumn, and everyone has this. This is, and I'm not kidding. Everyone is very careful. Everyone follows instructions very well, because everyone has this sense, this is not ours. This is for everyone, and we're only guests here. And that, I think, is what, you know, that was my takeaway. That is what I'm most grateful for. This sense of, wow, you know, we get to see this, you know, and I get it, you know, it's an expensive trip, you pay for it, and so on and so forth. But that never really enters the picture when you're there. You're really just like, oh, wow. And I get to see this, and I get to be a visitor here. That's it.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Mark. He says, we are so excited to be booked on the November the 2nd Antarctic Explorer with Viking. This will be marking our 12th Viking adventure. But his question for us today is, what was one single experience you had from this trip that you'd say to a future traveller like us to do the same experience?
I don't know if you're going to like the answer, but don't have that mindset. That would be, let this wash over you. You're not going to miss anything. You know, we sometimes travel, and I get it. You know, you go to Paris, and it's like, I went to the Louvre, I went to the Eiffel Tower, I saw the Champs-Élysées, and I bought some French cheese, right? You kind of work off of a mental checklist, and you have some ideas in your head of the things that you really want. The thing is, what you need to do is just be there. And if you can, I think what I most enjoyed is at some point, and this was in Cuverville Island, I just sat on the beach, I sat on a rock, and I spent about a good 45 minutes just watching the penguins come ashore. That's what you go there for, because the realization that these penguins will be there whether you're there or not, you know, it gives you, it teaches humility, if you will. And I think that's what you learn there. And I think that was my biggest takeaway, that you don't need to have a checkbox. The thing is, you're surprised every day. You're really surprised every day. That minke whale that was just like going with us, and it was funny because I was with Jørn Henriksen, who is our head of expedition, who's been there dozens of times. And this is it. he still gets incredibly excited because every day is a new day. Every day you get something that even someone like Jörn doesn't go like, oh, I've seen that 1,000 times before. So we're walking with the minke whale, and he's you're not supposed to do this, but he was so excited. He was yelling a little bit. He's like, look at it, look at it, look at it. And that is really, the sense of wonder. That bring that, and you'll have lots of these seminal moments. I really can't count them. Look, there were 80 pictures, and I went a little long and stuff like that. I can guarantee you there are as many pictures that I'm like, oh, that's a shame. I can't show you this. I can't show you that. It's an amazing place. It really is unlike anything else, any other place in the world. That was a long answer.
No, we like a long answer, Joost. No need to worry. Plenty of questions coming in about clothing, so I'm going to combine them all together. Plenty of questions asking about what clothes should our guests pack themselves, and are there any clothes that Viking provides when we are in Antarctica?
Yes, so we get you an insulating layer, which is basically just a little downy feeling jacket, and then we get you an outer coat. Which protects you from the elements, which protects you from rain and snow, and then and everything else. Oh, and boots. We have incredible boots. They were custom made, and those are some of the best footwear I've ever worn. So and then from the body. Yes, we start from the body and work our way out. Underwear, long underwear. And take that seriously. Layering is really, so whenever I would go out longer, which I did to help out, and you spend a good 4 hours out there altogether, I ended up wearing 2 long johns, and then a t-shirt, long underwear over the t-shirt, and then I would wear a sweater. I actually wore this quite a bit. Or just that downy jacket, depending on how warm it was. Bring extras. So I would bring, just because you might want to just have an extra layer. Gloves, whatever. You will find that for a little while, especially if you like to take a lot of pictures, get these gloves with the fingers cut off. Because it hardly ever gets so cold that your fingers start to get numb. But you need gloves. You need something on your head, a beanie. Really, you don't need to look pretty. You just need to be comfortable and warm. Let me see if I forgot anything. Socks. 2 pairs of socks always. I would always wear 2 pairs of socks. And yeah, that's it. And go to the bathroom before you get on the Zodiac, because having to go back from a landing because you need to go to the bathroom is somewhat of a pain.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Primoz, who is in the United States. They say Antarctica is definitely on our bucket list. I've heard that it's better to go on a smaller ship, as only 100 guests from each ship are allowed to disembark at each stop.
Yeah.
So, on a Viking cruise, how many disembarkations can a guest expect?
It's a good question. It's a very serious question. So on my second time around, and that was a full journey, we went to Brown Base, which is the Antarctic continent. If you feel that that's a must, and I'm saying continent because the other places where you stop are islands. Then President Head, Cuverville, and a fourth one that I can't think of right now. But again, and yes, if you are on a smaller ship, you can land more often. I don't necessarily believe that in and by itself is going to enhance your experience. we had Wilhelmina Bay. I bet you that on the first journey we had, what stood out for most people was the day in Wilhelmina Bay, where we didn't, we just cruised with the ship very, very slowly. We saw the minke whale, we saw the crab eater seal, we saw this incredible scenery. And Hidden Bay was another one where we cruised around with the Zodiacs and with the special operations boats, and we kayaked. Honestly, the landings are great. It's a great experience to kind of see the penguins from fairly up close. Again, I don't believe that you need to land to have a phenomenal day in Antarctica. So, and then I say, okay, our ship is just, and this is again, we work with a lot of people that have been on many expeditions with other companies. Our ship is ridiculously comfortable. It is just, and that's nice. You come back, you're a little frozen, perhaps. We have a really comfortable ship. You have places where you can meet other people, where you can chit chat with other people. We have a great team of lecturers. Really interesting people that add a lot to your enjoyment. On the first two journeys, the penguin count. One of the penguin counters was a gentleman by the name of Noah Stryker. Go on Amazon and find his books. At one point, he held the world record of different species of birds in 1 year. He saw over 6,000 birds and wrote a book about it. Really interesting guy. The scientists that you meet there are really interesting. We've had polar historians that were just phenomenal, and the ship is made for that. The ship is really good for meeting people, going to these lectures, doing a lot of different things. So I don't believe that we have any kind of a disadvantage over smaller ships.
Thank you, Joost. Our next question, I'm going to once again combine a few together because we have a lot come through about single passengers. So a question from Cleo, who is in Saratoga Springs in the United States. She asks, are there any single rooms on this ship? And then Dee Dee from Atlanta goes on to ask, is this a good trip for someone who is traveling on their own?
No and yes. We all of our staterooms have 2 beds, so there are no single cabins. It says yes, it's perfect because of precisely of what I just said. You're going ashore. You're part of a group of people that for ease of, for logistical ease, to make sure that you get on your zodiac, we put you in a group. So being in a zodiac, there's 8 people in a zodiac. You're very close, not too close, but you're very close together. So everything that you do is like a little bonding experience. And there's nothing quite that bonds you like, floating. The kayaking is a perfect bonding experience. Even if these are not people that but you all go through the same experience and you all kind of have to stay with your leader. So you do a lot of things in groups. I think it's perfect for people that travel individually, because very soon you will become part of, you're a Gentoo penguin or you're a chinstrap penguin. I was a snow petrel for both, and at some point people wear these patches and you're like, oh, you're a snow petrel. It's perfect.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Rita, who is in the US. She asks, will we see young penguins in early January? And then she also goes on to ask, along with, we've got quite a few questions, asking about the name of the book that you referred to during the presentation in the early stages.
Early January is very early for young penguins, but you can read much more about that in James Lowen's book, and it's called Antarctic Wildlife.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Joan, and she asks, how many passengers are on the Viking ship which sails to Antarctica?
The ship can hold up to 378 guests.
There we are. And then our next question for you comes from Josephine, who's in the US. She says, hello, my husband and I are scheduled to be on the Octantis this December. Have any passengers used their smartphones to take photographs, in her case, an iPhone, to capture photos of the scenery? Do you have any advice or recommendations for camera equipment?
Yeah, well, so all the video that you saw at the beginning of this, not the video that was, that was clearly nature documentary like, but what you saw kind of in the middle of the presentation, that was all done on an iPhone. And I think that's an iPhone 14. Absolutely. I think you can do magnificent things now with phones. And I have a lot more footage of kayaking that we did, where, yeah, bring a phone. You can also bring, I mean, I had a decent camera, but this is what I make my pictures with, by no stretch of the imagination, is some, this is a 10-year-old, no, it's probably like 12 years old. It's a Nikon that I got along, it's a relatively old camera with kind of a decent lens. You don't need to come with a bag of things to create really nice pictures. This is why I kind of, that's part of the whole idea here, is that I show you what you can do with, kind of middle of the road type of equipment. Certainly, I probably snuck some images in this presentation that were done on a phone. Yeah. I would bring both. If you're an avid photographer, I would bring both, because what you can do with these iPhones, it's incredible.
Thank you. So our next question for you is from an avid photographer, from William, who is in the US. He says, I will be going in January of 2023. Mm-hmm. Antarctica has always been on my wildlife bucket list as a photographer, and I can't wait to experience it. His question is, what lenses did you bring to capture the wildlife and scenery of Antarctica?
So the normally what I have on it is it's a Nikon body. It's an an 801, I think those are called, and that has a lens, that has a telephoto lens. It's a zoom that goes from 50, I believe, to 250 or 300 maybe. And then I got a very large lens. That was a present I gave myself, and that went to 400. And that was expensive, but I figured I'll splurge on it. That was an expensive piece of equipment. But, what the professional photographer that was on the ship said, try to bring a 400 lens, because that really, it gives you that little bit of extra. But I took a lot more pictures with the zoom, because it's just, that lens was big, and you don't always have the luxury of, lugging that around. I thought it was more important to be able to maneuver.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Dawn, and she asks, is Viking considering offering longer itineraries that would include the Falkland Islands and maybe the South Georgia Islands?
Sure. I just don't know when. For the time being, we like to set our itineraries quite far in advance. Because we always find that we want to make it available as broadly as we can and relatively quickly. Cruises do sell out sometimes like a year and a half in advance. So it always takes a little while for us to do new itineraries, and we like to get the initial itineraries down very well. But I'm sure that eventually that will come. Yes.
Thank you. And our next question for you comes from Cheryl, who is in San Jose in the US, and she asks, When is the best time of year to visit to see as much wildlife as possible?
I would probably, but again, just invest. It's so funny. Really, I don't know the gentleman, and I don't get a percentage, but get James Lowen's book and really go through that. I thought it was such a good way of really wrapping my head around all the complexities of this. I think mid to end of January is when you start to see the little ones, and who doesn't want to see small little penguin chicks. So I would probably pick that end of January, early February. But again, there's really not it's a very short season that you can actually go there. And really each of these months has its own charms and its own highlights. So, migrating whales don't wait around. They're in particular places at particular times where you can see a lot of them, and then it thins out. But I would probably go with second half of January, first half of February.
Thank you. And our next question comes from Anne, who is in the US. Her question is, will we actually round Cape Horn, or on the return from Antarctica, do you retrace your route back to Iceberg?
No, you round Cape Horn. The trick is always, do you actually see Cape Horn because of the weather? But yeah, you do. And on the way back, you round Cape Horn in this itinerary. The first time around, it was glorious, and everyone could really see it very up close. And the second time around, we had to kind of keep our distance because we had some choppy waves, and you can't get too close. And then it's kind of like, yeah, it's over there in the background. So there's no guarantee that you're going to round it, but what experience that is really depends on the weather.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Joanne, who is in Louisville in the US. She asks, she says, we'll be taking this trip in November, but is there an official ship's photographer on board as a source of photographs? Therefore, we don't have to take our own photos.
Not so. We have a photographer on board, and you have a lot of people on our expedition team who are photographers. And we're fine if you find, for instance, I on my first journey we had a brilliant woman who takes pictures of whales. That's all she really does, and she has a little website, and they're phenomenal. And I would encourage anyone to go to her website and look at them, and if you feel like it, purchase it. On the ship itself, we have a photographer that will help you make the best out of your pictures. And we will likely publish some of the materials, going forward, we will publish some of the materials that our own photographers do. But we're not looking to kind of, provide everyone with the 300 pictures of their journey. We do believe that it's fun to do a little bit of your own, but we will have documents, yes, of the trips. And we have some work to do there still. The first season, of course, coming out of COVID, we had a lot of other things that we needed to do. But in as much as the photographers on those first journeys were able to do photography, we do share. I mean, like I said, I've sent some of my material to other people. And this is actually, one of the beautiful things. We earlier had a question about, traveling as an individual. I found that people share their pictures like nobody's business. People get together and like, what did you were on my kayak ride. Did you get that picture of that whale? So it's great fun.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Ronald, who is in the US. His question is, which one, in your opinion, should I book? The Antarctic or the Arctic?
Both. No, look, honestly, that is a That's not an easy choice. I think, though, that Antarctica is really, getting there is a trek. It's really a trek, and I don't think they're comparable. They're both polar regions, so they have certain things in common. But you will not, going to Antarctica will not quench your thirst for the Arctic region, and vice versa. So you'll go to Svalbard and you're like, still want to see penguins. And after Antarctica, if anything, I'm like, now I need to go north and to Greenland and places like that and see polar bears and narwhals and belugas and walruses. So it's an impossible question to answer. But if you need to make one, I would. If it's just one, it shouldn't be one. Don't just make it about one. But if it is one, it's Antarctica.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Joan, who is in the United States. We have touched on this slightly earlier, but it is asking a slightly different question. She asks, how much walking is there on this cruise? And is this cruise at all appropriate for someone who uses a walker or a wheelchair?
Walker or wheelchair, it gets difficult to get off the ship, because even in the SOB, so the special operations boats, you need to be able to walk, I would say, without a walker. You need to be able to, and a handrail, but you would need to be able to walk at least 15, 20 yards. In a wheelchair, it gets tricky to just get on the SOB. Again, though, I'll say this again. This is the one cruise where I would say if you never get off the ship, you can still have a magnificent experience. And this is actually this was not just me. There were quite a few people that said, "Wow, this is amazing," even without ever stepping foot off the ship. So that's a consideration. And I would look at it that way. I would not, the last thing you want to do is travel to the end of the world and then, try to injure yourself by doing something that's out of reach. I think you can have a splendid time by just staying on the ship. But especially if you're wheelchair bound, it's going to be virtually impossible to get off the ship comfortably.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Nancy, who is in the US. And she asks, is there always an ornithologist and geologist on board to hang out with passengers?
Yes. Now, these are quite often these are people that have they specialize in polar regions. We had on our first two journeys, we had Julian Dowdeswell. He's kind of an exception, but we work together with Cambridge. We have a relationship there. We sponsored a chair. We had Julian Dowdeswell. He's the former head of the Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge, and he is, he's a glaciologist, but he also knows everything about Antarctic history. So he's more than happy to do a lecture on Scott and on Amundsen. So yes, you will have all of these people. You will have these specialists, but they're all kind of, they are people of they're people of multi talents. And it's not just the specialists that we list. It's also the two journeys I was on. We had young people who take on any work just to be in the polar regions. And among those, there were 2 PhD students that have hidden talents. Like I said, we have a formal photographer, but we also had 2 other people who made phenomenal photographs and who have a little sideline as photographers. So you'll have 3 or 4 people who can tell you how to hold your camera and what to do and what not to do and how to clean it and what to look for and things like that. you'll have 4 or 5 people who can tell you how to look for whales and how to become very professional about that. And then you'll have, the research scientists on the ship. Those are always, and we never quite, we know, but because we have a calendar, but you'll have research scientists, and those can be super interesting people. Like I mentioned, the penguin counter, who's also just a birder, like a magnificent birder nerd who sees 6,000 birds in 1 year. So it's a very colorful cast of characters, and that makes the experience just amazing.
Thank you very much, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Chris, who is in St. Louis in the US. And he asks, what is the best time of day to see whales?
It's not so much the time of day, it's whether the weather is calm or not. So whales don't care. It's not like, you're in the water. So the whale's not like, oh, the sun's out, let's go swim around a little bit. They're easier to spot if the sea is flat. They're much harder to see if it gets choppy. And there are particular areas where they will spend time. And our captains know this. So part of the whole, part of what we do is you have an expedition leader who's someone with a ton of experience in Antarctica, and you have a captain who also knows where what is, and we'll go and find people. We'll go and find wildlife. We know where the penguin colonies are. That's relatively easy, and then you have a good sense of where you might find certain species. Which is the fact that they know this helps. It's also a little anticlimactic sometimes. I remember, on our first journey, we saw these orcas, and they're a little smaller and they're a little greenish. And I forgot the exact reason why. And we were super excited, and we ran to Judith, our marine mammal specialist, and we're like, we saw orcas. And she was like, yeah, I kind of expected that. So, there are drawbacks to having an expert on your ship. But so we find these for you.
Thank you very much, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Dean, who is in Scottsdale in the US. He asks, what is the furthest we will walk, and what is the elevation change whilst walking around Antarctica?
You can take your pick. You can take your pick. You can go for maybe 70, 80 yards, and you'll be in the middle of a penguin colony, and you'll be able to, observe them from relatively close by. We keep a decent distance, but you really don't have to go very far on shore. And then you can climb a little bit. If you feel like you want to climb a little bit, you can do that. Now, if the question is how strenuous it is, that's again, it depends a little bit on what beaches you land on. Some beaches are very rocky. Some beaches are covered in snow. That all depends a little bit. But again, as long as you need, in order to get out of a zodiac, you need to be somewhat, you need to be able to move around, because you do need to, a zodiac is about 1.5 feet. You sit on, well, actually about 2 feet that you need to swing your legs over. And we can help you a little bit with that, but you need to still be able to stand on your own 2 legs. And usually you walk through about, I don't know, 1/2 foot of water or so, and then over some rocks to get to where you have a little bit more solid footing. But when it comes to the distance, that is not, that will never be a big issue. Like I said, on Cuverville, and that was just because I decided to do that, I walked onto the beach. It was maybe 15 yards. I found a big boulder, and I sat there watching the penguins for a while. And and I spent more time there, but that in and by itself was a perfect landing.
Thank you very much, Joost. Our next question comes from Kathleen, who is in the US. Speaking of penguins, she asks, what is the name of a baby penguin?
A chick. Penguin chick.
Oh, well, nice and simple answer for that one. And we've got a few questions who have come in from Lisa Ryan, who is in Boston. So I'm going to combine them all into one for you. Her first question is, she sees a lot of seaweed in some of the pictures, but she's wondering how much plant life there is underwater in Antarctica. And her second question is, how deep was the snow, and was the texture of the snow any different to what we have at home?
The snow in some places was rather deep, surprisingly deep. We have trekking poles for that, and we have snowshoes. Because in some places it was deep enough to make walking a little difficult. Underwater, there's a lot of life. There is a lot of plant life. Yes, there's a lot of kelp in different colors, and yeah, there's the people that were on the subs. We had a rough time with the first few cruises with our subs. They were inoperable because of mechanical and maintenance issues for the first few cruises. But you go underwater and there's another world. There's absolutely another world.
Thank you very much, Joost. And we have got a question from Anne, or well, it's a comment. Her name is Anne from Pittsford in the United States. And she says, this is incredible to relive this extraordinary expedition through your journey on the Octantis. We were on the third sailing. The ship, the crew, the entire expedition team made it a trip of a lifetime. And
Thank you.
Next question for you comes from Mary, and she says, I suffer with motion sickness, and she imagines that this cruise would not be suitable for her due to the rough seas. What would your opinion be on this, Joost?
So I can honestly say that the Drake Passage, as I experienced it 4 times, was not as bad as some of the swells I've had in the Med. And that's not to say that it was nothing. The days through the Drake Passage, you go back and forth a little. And I'm sure that there were people that were sick. So once you're through that, you're actually on the peninsula. You don't get a lot of swells. It's relatively placid. So I think, for motion sickness, you can be covered for the Drake Passage. And then the question is, okay, well, was that worth it? Yes, absolutely. Even if you were to be sick for a day, it's absolutely worth it. No doubt. And I have to say, I believe that on both of the journeys that I did, we did not have that many people who were incredibly sick, because it was all quite manageable.
Thank you very much, Joost. Then our next question for you comes from Frank, and he asks, must you have previous experience to use the kayaks?
No. You need to be able to get in and out of them, but you don't need previous experience. It's relatively easy. You need to have a good sense of balance, and you need to be able to, to support yourself when you're, when you slide into it. It's good that you can hold yourself by your own arms. But other than that, no, it's you don't need any kind of real expertise. We had a lot of people who did kayaking for the first time. So as long as you're somewhat fit, and not like workout fit, but just, if you're somewhat round, your stomach can get in the way a little bit. I'm a little bigger, and that makes it a little, but not very uncommon. But that was it makes maneuvering a little bit more difficult. But they're stable, they're easy to use, and it's spectacular. It's spectacular. It's worth that one moment that you may have as you go from the Zodiac into the kayak, where you go like, oh, absolutely worth it.
I don't think there's anywhere in the world where you can beat your first experience with a kayak, realistically. So yes, and our next question for you comes from Nancy, who is in the US. Her question is, can guests get their passports stamped with an Antarctica stamp?
No, because Antarctica doesn't belong to anyone. Now, what we do on most sailings by now is not far from Cuverville Island, there is a British base, and they stamp postcards. And what we do is you get a postcard, we put a stamp on it, you write it, we then with the zodiac deliver it to the post office. It gets canceled, the stamp gets canceled, and then the next ship that comes by will pick up the mailbag and deliver it in Ushuaia in Argentina, and then the postcard makes its way around the world. That we can do, but you can't. There's no authority in Antarctica. The Antarctic Treaty basically says this continent is for science, and it doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to the penguins. And you know, stamping a passport basically means that there is a country that claims jurisdiction, and you can't do that. You can have a research station that's financed, let's say, by the Argentinian or by the Belgian government, but you can't claim jurisdiction. No stamps in passports, just on postcards.
Perfect. And our next question for you comes from Kathleen. From Corvallis again. She's asked a few questions this evening. I think I've got another one coming up from her as well. Her question is, will you be doing the same experience but going to the Arctic when the ship makes its way up?
I hope so. You know, we just come off of 2 years of very unusual circumstances, so I'm hedging my bets, but you know, part of the reason I have such a beautiful job is that I do get to go to these places. Yep.
Absolutely. And the next question is from Nancy, who is in Kansas City in the US. She asks, what were the dates for your trip? We'd like to see how it matches with the trip that we've got booked for next year.
16th of January, I think I was in, it was the 16th of January. That was when I left Ushuaia. And so then I stayed on, and then the next one was late in January. I came back on February 3rd. So it was the last, it was the roughly the 2.5 weeks of January, and then the first half week of February.
Thank you, Joost. And our next question comes from Katie. And it's decided to disappear off my screen. Let's find that back. Oh, Kirsty. There we are. Her question is, how long is each excursion from the Octantis?
Well, it depends a little bit, of course, on what it is. It can be a scenic zodiac ride. It can be a landing, or it can be a ride on the special operations boat, or it can be kayaking. And we try to keep all of this, I would say, from door to door, if you will, 1.5 hours to 1 hour and 45 minutes. Having said that, for instance, when it's a landing and you would like to linger a little longer, the way that works is the zodiacs bring you from the ship to the landing site. And there you go on shore. And some people are done after 20 minutes, and some people want to hang out for 45. And some people, if you want to stay a little longer, and if if you're cold resistant, then you may want to hang on a little longer. And constantly, when the first zodiac sets foot ashore, that's the crew. They bring all kinds of emergency gear and everything that you need to then have a great experience. They kind of map out the landing site. They prepare the landing site. I did some of that stuff. That's great because you get to make trails with big snowshoes. You know, you get to be like the human Zamboni, and all of that work is done. And then the first zodiacs start to arrive with guests, and then 20 minutes later or so, the first zodiac goes back with some guests as other zodiacs arrive. We just have to make sure that we never have more than 100 people on shore at one time. But given that some guests leave a little early, you could also stay a little longer if you wanted to. My experience is that what we have works really well for most guests. It's not a number that we just picked out of thin air. It was something that the people with a lot of experience said that's kind of the sweet spot.
Thank you very much, Joost. And our next question comes from Denise, who is in the US. She asks, are there any activities like camping or doing a polar plunge?
Yes. So the camping is something that can happen, but it's not that easy to pull off, because you need to be in an area where you can have the ship. You're going to have guests get off the ship, set up camp, spend the night, and then be picked up again. That happens. You have those circumstances maybe once a journey, and you need pretty perfect weather. So they're rare experiences. They're rare circumstances. Everything needs to be just right. For the polar plunge, we just figured we have an outdoor pool, and we use that for the polar plunge, which is, our doctor says that's the safest possible way to do this. And we're adding experiences as we gain experience, but the polar plunge for now happens in the pools on the ship. It's cold. It delivers on that experience that it's really, really cold.
Thank you very much, Joost. And we have a few questions coming in about the kayaks, whether people are going to be able to fit in them or not. We've got a question here saying this gentleman is 2 meters tall. Would he be able to fit? And we've also got another question from another guest who says they have a 54-inch waist and they're 6'2". Would they be able to fit in the kayaks at all?
Yeah. Yes. The question is it going to be comfortable? And that's something that you would need to judge. That really depends on how flexible you are. The gentleman that's 2 meters, I'm 188, so I'm 12 centimeters shorter than you are. You're going to be a little bit more crunched because, as you pedal, it's like you sit on a bicycle in a way, and that bicycle will feel a little small for you, but you can still do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Kathleen once again. And she asks, is anyone blogging live from the ships as they travel in between the poles?
On our ship right now, no, not that I know of. Blogging also, and maybe this is, for some people this is horror, and for some people this is a blessing. You get to a point in Antarctica where there's absolutely no way that you have internet. So to blog on a daily basis would be no mean feat. You would have to wait until you have a signal again, and it really has to do with, you cannot get any more remote on this planet than in Antarctica. So that's sometimes a challenge. But overall, I don't know that anyone is doing it. It's not one of our people because they're really busy on the ship. I don't know. You would have to, we don't have a resident blogger.
Thank you very much, Joost. Then our next question for you comes from Dean, who is in the US, and he asks, are there different sized kayaks? For example, 1 man, 2 man?
They're all 2 men. They're all two-person kayaks. And that's just, for economy's sake, to get as many people on the water as we can. It's and with the amount of space we have on the ship, obviously, the ship is not huge. It's a decent size, but we try to be very careful with how we use our space. And that was by far the most efficient way of doing it. So they're all 2-person kayaks, except for the kayak guides, they have their own. And that's just because they need to be very agile and assist, and and they also use paddles, but they're professionals.
Thank you very much, Joost. And our next question for you comes from Tom, who's in Austin in the US. He asks, what camera equipment did you use? Did you take a tripod at all? I know earlier we spoke about lenses, but any other equipment you were using then?
Nope. No, just the camera, and so a camera, body, and two lenses. That was it. And then you just, you rest on a rock or something like that. There were people that brought a lot of equipment, and and their pictures are better than mine. There were people that brought a lot of equipment. I think it's always a little bit of finding a balance between recording this for posterity and actually being there. And I find that if I have a camera and I'm agile enough and I can move around and about, the camera actually helps me enjoy what I'm seeing, because it kind of focuses your view. So I don't believe that it's necessarily a bad thing, but to set up a tripod, that's a lot of work. But there were some people that were quite good and quite quick with it. So, we have all shit, and I think that's the beautiful thing. The resident photography program is meant to help people that bring a tripod and a box full of lenses and things, and also someone that comes with a Samsung and says, where are the penguins? I'd like to take a picture, and the beautiful thing I found is that the photographer knows how to get the most out of whatever equipment you have, actually knows a handful of things about your own smartphone that you probably didn't know yet.
Thank you very much, Joost. Then our next question for you comes from Kimberly in the US. She says, thank you so much for sharing your photos and impressions of Antarctica. But when will the 2024 Antarctic expedition itineraries be released?
2024, where are we? We're in... I don't think that's that far away anymore. But like I said, we're trying to not open up too much at one time. We like to kind of make sure that the ships are filled before we, essentially we always want to have things on the shelf to purchase, and we only have so much bandwidth, if you will. But again, if you have a particular date in mind, or you can always ask. We generally do, if you will, soft launches. And if you're really that eager, just give our call center a call, or call your travel agent. It's not going to be much longer.
Absolutely. And our next question for you comes from Michael, who is in Boston in the US. He says, how exciting about the Drake Passage, but what was the reason to cause the shift from option A to B down to C?
Oh, okay. So on that first, weather, it's just a matter of, so once you get onto the peninsula, you're all of a sudden dealing with, all these little inlets, and you should zoom in on a map, and you will see, that it's really, the peninsula is this series of islands where you have little bays. Those are perfect. But to find Hidden Bay, for instance, which is, it's a very decent size, and you can travel around in zodiacs and in special operations boats and in kayaks. And on a map, it's a pinprick. On a big map of Antarctica, it's a pinprick. So in order to get into these bays, quite often you need to have good weather, because otherwise it just becomes a little hairy. These are very secluded little areas. And so you have to make sure, A, that the wind is not, that you don't have high winds, so that you're not pushed against some reefs or a cliff, and also ice. In many cases, we had to change our plans because we had early on, so mid-January, we had an unusual amount of ice in some of the channels. So that's it. It's just that night, it was a combination of winds, ice in places where around that time of year you normally don't expect that, and that got us to to plan C. And don't get me wrong, it's not like, well, plan A is where the really good penguins are, and plan B is where the so-so penguins are, and plan C is where it's kind of the dregs. It's simply a matter of, okay, this is the plan, but we can do a lot of different things because the distances aren't that great, and the scenery is it's always different, but it certainly is comparable from just the experiential point of view. Like on the first journey, I went to a number of points that I revisited, and then I went to some places that were unique. And honestly, I cannot say, okay, well, no, really, that was the best, out of those 3 weeks, that was the best spot. And I would trade that spot for a whole, it's like there's not a day that I would have liked to miss. And there's not a day where I'm like, okay, well, that I could have done without.
Thank you very much, Joost. And once you've answered our next question, we do have a short video to play as well. But this question comes from Daryl, who is in Bleachertown in the US. He says, thank you for this fantastic presentation, Joost. His question is, what is the name of the itinerary that you sailed on?
Antarctic Explorer. And I bet you that's the video you're going to show.
Follow in the tradition of the great polar explorers, setting your sights on Antarctica with this fascinating 13-day itinerary. Your once-in-a-lifetime journey begins in Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires. Then it's on to Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world. From here, you'll sail past legendary Cape Horn and cross the fabled Drake Passage as you head for the bottom of the world. Antarctica. This is nature at its most flawless. An immense wild land of extremes and rugged beauty. A place so remote it eluded discovery until just 2 centuries ago. Norwegian Roald Amundsen, the first man to the South Pole, described this place as a wonderful fairy tale in blue and white. In this extraordinary setting, you'll enjoy a week of enlightening, educational, and deeply enriching experiences. Each one designed to help you better understand the intricate details of this fabled continent. A majestic ecosystem only a tiny fraction of the world's population will ever have the privilege to see. Your purpose-built Viking vessel is an ideal base from which to explore and learn. A floating classroom sharing the science behind the otherworldly environment you're exploring. The ships of Vikings sail with a range of vessels designed to explore from the sea, making it easy to investigate these stunning landscapes. As you travel these dramatic waters, your nature-based schedule will be optimized to take advantage of weather and, most importantly, wildlife viewing opportunities. You have a front row seat in nature's greatest theatre when Antarctica's locals decide to put on their display. And of course, in the spirit of discovery, you'll spend significant time on the continent's unspoiled shores, examining the extreme geology with expedition leaders. An exploration of Antarctica with Viking is an illuminating, rewarding journey. A profound, thought-provoking immersion into this remarkable place. An unforgettable adventure where you are sure to be humbled by nature. Your expedition concludes in Ushuaia, Argentina, the world's southernmost city, where you'll board your flight for a return to Buenos Aires.
Thank you very much. And we've got a few comments coming in thanking you, Joost, for the presentation that you've given us this evening. So Lisa from Boston is saying excellent pictures. Thank you very much, Joost. Catherine from Missions Hills in the United States. Outstanding presentation. Thank you very much. But we do have one final question for you. And it is, here somewhere. It's disappeared. Here we are, yes. So, with regards to camera tripods, would a guest be able to take it on shore on Antarctica, or would that have to remain on board the ship?
No, you can, as long as you bring it out again, you have to bring everything that you bring on shore back with you. But you can do that. Yeah.
And that's all the questions we have today, Joost. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. It was a bit of a long one, but it's what you get when you ask someone to show their pictures and recount their experience. You have to go. Thanks for watching.